Imagine you're this brilliant 26-year-old software engineer. You know your code perfectly. You've studied your English grammar rules for years.
Right, you've totally done the work.
Exactly. You've done the work, and you finally land this massive interview with a top international firm. The stakes are incredibly high, but, you're prepared.
You're ready to go.
Yeah, but then the video call connects. The interviewers start firing off questions, and suddenly your brain just completely flatlines.
Oh, wow.
You're hearing the words, but they feel like a movie on fast forward. Your mouth completely freezes up. You panic. You start stumbling through these broken answers, and you basically just watch the opportunity of a lifetime slip away.
I mean, it's a nightmare scenario, but honestly, it is incredibly common. The gap between understanding a skill on paper and actually performing it in real time, that is a total psychological minefield.
And bridging that gap is the entire focus of our deep dive today. So, welcome. Whether you are, picking up a new language, trying to master a complex professional skill, or honestly just trying to communicate better in your daily life, the material we have today is an absolute goldmine for you.
It really is.
We are looking at a really fascinating stack of sources today, specifically transcripts from 3 hugely popular YouTube language learning channels. We've got material from Talk Emma, Mr. English channel, and a channel called English 1314, which takes a surprisingly philosophical approach to learning.
Yeah, and what really stands out across all these sources is their fundamental approach.
Yeah.
Like, they aren't treating language like a math equation where input simply equals output.
Right.
They are meticulously documenting the actual human experience of learning. The anxiety, the friction, the mental blocks.
Yeah, we aren't going to sit here and review English grammar rules. The mission of this deep dive is to extract the practical hacks and the underlying psychological shifts that take a person from a frozen, fearful beginner to a confident, fluent communicator.
Exactly.
We are going to look at why our brains sabotage us exactly when we need to speak the most. Okay, let's unpack this by starting with something that terrifies almost every beginner. The everyday magic of small talk.
Oh, small talk gets dismissed as trivial all the time.
Yeah.
But it really functions as the critical foundation of all human connection.
Yeah.
I mean, it is the initial handshake of trust before any deep information is even exchanged.
Absolutely. And looking at the beginner lessons, specifically this A1 to A2 level content from Mr. English channel, hosted by Jack and Emma, they spend an enormous amount of time on seemingly basic topics like hobbies and free time.
Right, the stuff you learn on day one.
Exactly. But they identify a very specific problem that learners face in these situations. When someone asks a beginner a question, the beginner's instinct is to give a single one-word answer.
Just stating facts.
Yeah, like, I am hungry, I am late, I like reading. And the speaker just ends up sounding like a robot delivering data rather than, a human being having a chat.
Well, yeah, because under pressure, the brain prioritizes survival over nuance. When you are nervous, your cognitive load is totally maxed out. Your brain literally treats the question like a threat that needs to be neutralized.
Just give the answer and get out.
Exactly. A short, abrupt answer closes the loop and gets you out of the spotlight. You are conveying the necessary information, sure, but you're completely stripping away the humanity.
Okay, so to solve this, the Jack and Emma lesson introduces this brilliant concept called the detail rule.
Oh, I love this part.
Right. The premise is that instead of memorizing massive, complex vocabulary lists to sound fluent, you can instantly sound more natural just by adding tiny, everyday details to your sentences. You deliberately avoid those one-word answers.
So you add batting.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So instead of robotically stating, I am hungry, you upgrade it to, I'm really hungry right now.
Right.
And instead of, I am late, you say, I'm a little late today.
It fundamentally changes the rhythm of the interaction. Those added words soften the delivery, and they subtly signal to the other person that you are actually open to continuing the exchange.
But wait, I have to push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
If a beginner is already panicking, if their cognitive load is already maxed out, like you just said, doesn't asking them to remember to add extra words like right now or a little bit, just give them more vocabulary to juggle.
You'd think so, right?
Doesn't it make the anxiety worse?
It seems like it would, but functionally it does the exact opposite. These filler details basically act as cognitive scaffolding.
Scaffolding, okay.
Yeah, they are highly practiced modular phrases that you just attach to the core message. So when you say, I'm a little late today, those extra syllables actually buy your brain precious milliseconds of processing time.
Oh, I see.
You aren't desperately searching for a complex word. You are relying on a simple rhythmic pattern to keep the conversation flowing while your brain, like, cues up the very next thought.
You're creating a natural cadence. It makes me think of cooking.
Cooking.
Yeah, like you don't need an expensive, exotic pantry to make a dish taste incredible. You just need to add a pinch of salt and pepper to the basic ingredients,
Yeah.
right? You are just seasoning your sentences to make them palatable.
That culinary analogy fits perfectly, especially considering the examples they use in the source material.
Oh my gosh, the cooking stories. I have to share this because it perfectly illustrates what Jack and Emma are trying to achieve on their channel.
It's so good.
So, in this basic lesson on hobbies, Jack decides to share a funny story about his own favorite hobby, which is baking.
Right.
He describes trying to bake this big, ambitious chocolate cake. He's listening to music, dancing around his kitchen, completely in the flow state. But he makes a catastrophic error. He reaches for the wrong white powder.
A classic, terrifying kitchen disaster.
Exactly. He dumps 2 whole cups of salt into the batter by mistake instead of sugar.
2 cups.
2 whole cups, and he bakes the entire thing completely oblivious until he takes a bite and his face just completely scrunches up. It is an inedible, aggressively salty chocolate cake.
Oh, that's awful.
It is, but he actually tells the story to his cooking class later, and they relentlessly crown him with the nickname the Salt Queen.
I mean, it takes a lot of vulnerability to broadcast a story where you look completely foolish like that.
It really does, and his co-host, Emily, immediately jumps in with her own failure.
Oh yeah, the painting story.
Yeah. She talks about taking up painting. She goes to this beautiful park, sets up an easel by a lake, spends hours trying to capture nature. She proudly brings the canvas home to her grandmother, and her grandmother takes one long look at it and says, "Emily, this lake looks like a blue potato."
Just brutal, unfiltered honesty from Grandma.
Totally brutal. But they share these humiliating stories with so much joy.
Well, the pedagogical strategy behind those stories is actually brilliant. These channels lean heavily into hobbies and embarrassing mistakes because sharing a failure fundamentally lowers the stakes of the interaction.
Right.
When a teacher leads with a story about a massive, hilarious failure like a salty cake or a blue potato, it absolutely shatters the illusion of perfection.
Yeah, you're not intimidated by them anymore.
Exactly. It proves to the learner that the goal of communication isn't to act like a flawless dictionary. The goal is just to make the other person laugh, or nod, or simply understand your humanity.
And lowering the stakes is incredibly important for building confidence. But, confidence alone doesn't actually put the right words in your mouth. You still need a physical mechanism to get the language out under pressure.
Which is exactly the wall that the Brazilian engineer hit in our opening story.
Yes. The case study from English 1314 illustrates this perfectly. That software engineer knew the grammar, he had the vocabulary stored in his memory, but his failure wasn't a lack of knowledge, right? It was a mechanical breakdown.
Right. He realized that language isn't just static data. It is a physical performance.
So after failing that massive job interview, he completely abandoned traditional learning methods. He stopped trying to memorize these massive lists of rules, and he actually created his own highly practical 5-month method.
Which is fascinating.
It really is. And the very first step he took was creating a safety net. He built a list of just 50 survival sentences. Phrases like, "Can you repeat that, please?" Or, "I want to make sure I understand."
Yeah, and those survival phrases serve a really crucial function. They give the learner permission to pause that fast-forward movie in their head.
Right.
But his next step, the actual technique he used to wire the language into his brain, is where the methodology gets truly fascinating.
He utilized a technique called shadowing, which is also heavily emphasized in the Talk Emma transcripts.
Yes, shadowing is huge.
For those unfamiliar, shadowing involves taking a short, 10 to 20-second audio clip of a native speaker. You listen to it, and then you immediately speak right over the original audio without pausing.
You're trying to match their exact rhythm, their stress points, the complete musicality of how they speak.
You are mimicking the prosody of the language. You literally ignore the text on the page and focus entirely on the sound waves. And the sources outline a very specific way to practice this, involving tiny 3-second pauses to catch the beat. Actually, let's try an interactive shadowing practice right now.
Oh, let's do it.
I want you to try it. I'll say a phrase slowly and clearly, and I want you to wait exactly 3 seconds, feeling that rhythm in your head before you repeat it with my exact intonation. Ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Mistakes are just part of the journey.
1, 2, 3. Mistakes are just part of the journey.
Perfect. Now imagine doing that continuously. You'd feel your brain scramble. It literally forces your mouth to move before your anxiety can even kick in.
Oh yeah, that scramble you feel is the literal sensation of your brain forming new neural pathways.
But it requires intense focus, which can sometimes backfire in public.
Oh no.
Yeah. In the talk, Emma shares a story about doing her shadowing practice in a crowded, very quiet cafe.
That sounds risky.
Very risky. She had her noise-canceling headphones on, completely immersed in an audio clip from an intense action movie.
Oh, I can see where this is going.
She was trying to match the actor's urgency, right? And she accidentally shouted at the top of her lungs, "Let's go, we don't have much time."
Out loud. In the cafe.
Yes. Every single person in the cafe turned and stared at her.
She basically transformed into an action hero in the middle of a coffee shop?
It's hilarious. But I have a serious question about this method.
Okay, go for it.
On the surface, isn't shadowing just mindless parroting? Like you're essentially imitating a bird. How does shouting a scripted movie line actually help someone learn to formulate their own dynamic thoughts in a real, unpredictable conversation?
I know, it totally feels counterintuitive, but from a neurological standpoint, shadowing solves the exact problem that caused the engineer to freeze in his interview. It completely bypasses the brain's slow translation phase.
Okay, walk me through the mechanics of that translation phase. What is actually happening?
Sure. So when you first learn a language in a traditional classroom setting, your brain basically operates like a manual dictionary. You hear an English word, then you decode it into your native language. Then you formulate your response in your native language. Then you encode that response back into English.
That is a lot of steps.
It is. And finally, you send the signal to your mouth to actually speak. That is a heavy, multi-step cognitive load. It is exhausting, and it's incredibly slow.
So because the interview was moving in real time, the native speakers were firing off idioms and fast sentences, and his internal translation dictionary simply couldn't boot up fast enough to keep pace.
Exactly. By focusing entirely on the musicality of the language through shadowing, the actual physical flow of the vowels and consonants learners are building muscle memory in their mouths.
Wow.
You're taking language out of the intellect and turning it into a physical reflex.
Mm-hmm.
You train the articulatory muscles to move in certain patterns without waiting for the conscious brain to approve every single syllable.
So you're training your mouth to basically run on autopilot, which then frees up your cognitive bandwidth to actually focus on the ideas you want to share.
Yes. The physical act of speaking just becomes second nature.
That makes complete sense. But implementing this requires a massive psychological shift. I mean, to sit in a cafe and accidentally shout a movie line, or to proudly share the story of a salty chocolate cake, that requires a profound lack of self-consciousness.
It really does.
Which actually brings us to the underlying theme of this entire deep dive, the hidden psychology of learning.
Yeah, the English 1314 sources take a really deep dive into the philosophy behind this vulnerability. They make a very compelling argument that the ego is the absolute biggest enemy of learning any new skill.
They treat it almost like a major life lesson. But why does the ego fight so hard against the learning process?
Because as adults, our identities are deeply, deeply tied to our competence. We spend years building a persona of someone who is capable, articulate, intelligent.
Right.
When you attempt to speak a new language, that competence is instantly stripped away. You are reduced to a childlike state. You literally lack the vocabulary to express your complex thoughts. You sound clumsy.
You bake a cake with salt. You paint a blue potato.
Exactly. And your brain perceives that clumsiness as a literal social threat. When someone corrects your pronunciation, or when you stumble over a basic greeting, your ego panics.
It goes into survival mode.
Yes. The evolutionary response is to protect your status, so you react defensively. You want to shut down, end the conversation, or lash out.
And the source introduces a mechanism to combat this panic, which they call the 5-second rule.
Yes.
When you hit a wall in communication, when you feel that flush of embarrassment or someone just looks confused by what you said, you must pause and breathe for 5 full seconds before responding. You literally count it out in your head.
Right. And taking that a step further, this is basically an exercise in emotional regulation. It is a wedge driven between stimulus and response.
Oh, I like that.
By forcing that 5-second pause, you are taking the steering wheel back from your ego. You let the immediate wave of that threat response fade, and you actually choose to respond with intention rather than reacting out of pure fear. You simply refuse to let external judgment dictate your internal state.
But dealing with that judgment in the moment is exhausting. So to build the resilience required for that 5-second pause, The source introduces this really beautiful concept of the personal laboratory.
Oh, this is such a great concept.
They suggest taking the time you spend alone and transforming it into an intentional sanctuary.
It frames solitude not as isolation, but as a deliberate practice space.
Exactly. You use this personal laboratory to do your shadowing exercises, to narrate your day out loud as you make breakfast, to sing along to English songs. You deliberately make all your most embarrassing mistakes in an environment where the ego has absolutely no audience to perform for.
Right. There's no one to judge you.
But this raises a paradox for me. Are they arguing that to become better at social communication, to genuinely connect with other human beings, you actually have to master isolating yourself first?
I mean, it sounds contradictory, but it hinges on the difference between isolation and intentional solitude.
Okay, what's the difference?
Isolation is hiding from the world because you fear its judgment. Intentional solitude is stepping away to build what the Source beautifully terms an inner sun.
I love the imagery of an inner sun.
It's great, right?
Yeah.
By creating a safe laboratory to fail in private, you are systematically building self-trust. You are proving to your own nervous system that a mistake does not destroy you. You actually become comfortable with your own clumsiness.
Right?
So when you eventually step out of that laboratory and enter a real conversation, your entire posture is different. You aren't desperately seeking the other person's validation to feel smart. You aren't terrified of their judgment.
Because your inner sun is already generating its own warmth and confidence. You aren't asking the listener to prop up your ego. You are just offering them a real connection.
And people instinctively feel that shift. When you communicate from a place of wholeness rather than a place of defensive fear, people are just drawn to you. They easily forgive grammatical errors or misplaced words because they're engaging with your quiet confidence.
Let's bring all of these concepts together for you, the listener, because we have traveled from simple vocabulary hacks all the way down to the philosophy of the human ego. The blueprint that emerges from combining these resources is just incredibly cohesive.
It really provides a complete roadmap for bypassing your own mental roadblocks.
Whether you are learning a new language, preparing for a high-stakes presentation at work, or honestly just wanting to be a more present, engaging conversationalist, the methodology is exactly the same. First, utilize the detail rule.
Right.
Add those little seasonings, the right nows and the todays, to build cognitive scaffolding. Buy your brain time to think while sounding naturally human. Second, build the physical machinery using shadowing. Train your mouth to recognize the rhythm and prosody so you can bypass the exhausting internal translation dictionary.
And third, and honestly most importantly, dismantle the ego. Implement the 5-second rule to breathe through the inevitable panic of making a mistake and cultivate your personal laboratory. Use intentional solitude to build the self-trust required to fail gracefully.
Which allows you to finally step back and just laugh at your own missteps. And that leaves us with a final thought to ponder today. We spend an exhausting amount of our daily energy trying to hide our flaws.
We really do.
We curate our lives to appear perfectly competent, perfectly fluent, and entirely put together. But think back to Jack and his catastrophic baking disaster. What if the embarrassing mistakes you make while you are learning your own metaphorical salty chocolate cakes aren't actually roadblocks to your success?
Oh, wow.
What if those messy, imperfect, deeply vulnerable moments are the exact things that make you approachable, memorable, and truly worth talking to?
Well, connection rarely happens in the absence of vulnerability.
Exactly. So go ahead and make a few salty cakes. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.